Hi, this is Rooney207. Welcome back. For this particular episode, we'll talk about the our continuing series on the AICPA's SOC 2 for the Service Organization Control. And thank you so much for others that have provided me some feedback in for the previous videos on the SOC 2 piece. And for today, we wanted to talk about the processing integrity TSP for the principal, and we wanted to look at what is processing integrity and why is it important and why should you as a customer think about asking the client to include that into their SOC 2 report on top of the security principle. And processing integrity involves, make this a little bit bigger here. It provides everything that we audit essentially from the system wise. We want to demonstrate that it's complete, it's valid, it's accurate, and it's timely and authorized to fully satisfy the entity's objectives. Basically, the agreement that they have with you, the customer. The processing integrity criteria test associated with the SOC 2 audit process, it sets to reveal that there are no errors in the processing of it, and if there are any errors, then you definitely want to look at it to correct, and you want to have conversation with the customer. In terms of processing, the other integrity criteria also focuses on inputs and outputs to the system, ensuring they are accurate throughout the processing of any of the actions within the system. Processing integrity, it spotlights the data itself as far as it is stored, maintained while under the service organization's care and responsibility. Why would this be important to a gamer? Maybe not so much if your primary focus is to just have fun, entertainment is kind of to pass some of the time. But if you have an investment in it and you plan to retain that investment and you look at developing it as a long-term hold and you expect to have, especially if you're staking, let's say like LOCA tokens or SPS in Splinterlands, and you're part of the DAO mechanism, you as a user, as a business owner, because in essence, as a Splinterlands player, and if you're investing in it, you're a business owner. And then if you're part of the DAO, the SPS DAO, you're also a DAO equity holder. So there are two staking components of it. And so sometimes from an integrity of the game perspective, so we look at, let's say, like some of Gang's points regarding some of the voting of the council members, and also to represent the community, and then also some of the I guess the GLX token, or some of the ways that the GLX token may have been taken advantage of from an inherent weakness on the design of the system initially. The team resolved it fairly quickly. So I think as certain instances like that, we as a community member, as an investor, and as part of the DAO itself, both the SPS and the GLX DAO, we want to be aware, and we want to work with the team, and we want to bring it to their attention. It's unfortunate that in this situation, it wasn't the group of individuals decided to take advantage of the vulnerability of the exploit instead, and that happens, and including bots and other. I believe there are inherent weaknesses. So I hope over time the team will grow, and they'll have resources, and they'll undergo these types of audit and these types of conversations. I think the QA or the testers, let's say for the League of Kingdoms, they rely heavily on the user base, the player base, to test what their releases are, versus I think the Splinterlands community, they do have a QA team, and then they release it to the MAV group to build and test it and prior to going to the general population. So there is a process, I think, from a gaming, especially for meta cards and those elements. But I think when it comes to the actual token itself, when changes in the system that are inherently flawed, or their weaknesses it may not be tested by the Mav chat group and also the community and those who heavily use it or those who are business partners of Splinterlands. They tend to be aware of these vulnerabilities and the exploits prior. So some may choose to take advantage of it, while others may work collaboratively with the team. So I can't say I think everyone has different values and perspective on that. You know, I allow the community and the team to express their thoughts. And so this is one of the reasons why processing integrity is an important principle within the service organization controlled too. Anytime that a user enlists the outside sourcing of a service organization, it is important to know the key points. This is one of the, as a user and an investor within the Splinterlands ecosystem, we definitely want to be aware of that. And it is important to determine that the system itself has the appropriate levels of integrity to protect the user's entity's information along with the system itself. So I think this is kind of what I was referring to earlier. Processing integrity is a vital part of the service organization because part of it is the agreement. And I think in a typical Web 2 gaming, we have the end user licensing, the EULA agreement piece that a player agrees to. But I think in a Web 3 environment, we'll have to mature the CMMI process for this component to hopefully incorporate a higher level or a secondary agreement between the actual ownership of it as an investor. And I think we're far off from that conversation, and it depends on regulations and a couple of number of factors, and also the DAO piece of it, and who's actually the fiduciary individual in the parties. There's a lot of components that need to define. This is one of the reasons why I think Web3 games, the more you invest, the higher and the more significant your risk is within the actual ecosystem, because the exposure is pretty high. And I don't think many players will throw, some players may throw 25, 50, 100,000 or more into this ecosystem, and they may not realize that it's a risk, and maybe to them it's not a lot of money, and it's something that they can afford to lose, so that from their perspective they may be okay with it. Everyone's different. And so you will know that your service organization is operating with processing integrity if it exists, that if the system performs all of its intended functions in an unimpaired manner. So I think sometimes the database between the rental market and the business partners that use the ecosystem, and also within the Hive layer 1 blockchain, it slows down a lot. So I don't know what the SLA is as a player, and as a owner, I don't think that you've ever agreed to. It's whatever the team can handle, and you kind of defer to PJ on that one, the chief technology officer. And also, even for League of Kingdoms, you have lags. You have within their CBC events, you have a lot of delays. You have troops that go missing. You have lost troops, and you can't really retrieve them, and you can't teleport. You can't move your castles. So you can't go in and out between CBC and the home kingdom. So there's definitely complexity. And then when you have battle scrimmages, like an example, you have the data element that goes into the calculation, but you don't really know the components that go into the actual calculation. And so at times you lose troops, or you're unable to recover, and you try to even send more and more rallies on it, and you just don't really know at the end of the day. So it can be frustrating from that perspective as a player. And on top of that, if you're an investor, you stake your loca for your continent, and you have some level of expectations. There isn't really a defined level. So these are kind of some of the agreements. I think it needs these SLAs and SOPs for the operations side that needs to be worked out for Web3 games in general. And sometimes there's duplicate processing too. There's conflicts, and we just need to work through it. So these are some of the reasons why we want to include processing integrity. And then as Java Mat as a CPO works towards that product and brings many elements like the LAN piece, the resource management component of it, how much automation and things. So we want to make sure because there's going to be definite arbitrage, or some regions may produce more resources than others. So there's definitely going to be that gap within their ecosystem, the land management, resource management part of the part of the game, and we'll see how it works and if the algorithm works out appropriately and things like that. So. And I think the team has done a fantastic job in terms of learning and incorporating their process and their growth. The game has changed significantly since the first day I started playing it. Kitty was a dominant card. It still is relatively dominant, but I've noticed even in my last brawl, I was able to use Lily Shieldpaw, and the individual I battled with had maxed Kitty for gold and then max cards at the gold league, and I was able to beat the person. So I was pretty happy with that kind of meta change, and also in terms of game fairness perspective, fair play. I think Yaba has done a fantastic job in terms of like how Chaos Legion and how Rift Watcher, the cards are changing the meta. There's really no single dominant. In some instances, it's RNG, roll of the dice. So, and that's what makes I think games interesting, and it's kind of a little bit like poker. Sometimes you play the optimal hand, but over time you'll win, you'll do better. But in terms of its close match, the percentages and things like that, sometimes you lose because of probability. And I think that's what makes the guess Splinterlands such a fantastic game. Maybe not everyone agrees with it, but I think it's a lot. It's very engaging and sometimes addictive. At least for me, this is why I like it so much. I know card games in general historically has always retained its value. It may not represent the largest in terms of the gaming genre. It's one of the top 10 gaming genres, but it's not the top. It's not like action or things like that that represents the higher needs or MMO type gaming. But I think in terms of longevity and consistency, card games always stand the test of time, I believe. And then the transactions, the submitted transactions, you want to make sure it's not inaccurate. It represents what the service organization states, delays, the user entity. If you believe the system that is being performed by the users without any approval, I think sometimes when we send our memo key or our posting key to a vendor of Splinterlands, to another party that has engaged Splinterlands and have used their system. I think it's something that we need to be aware of. And one of the components, like you would want to know that vendor, do they turn it off? Let's say if you disable your account, is it turned off? Is it still being processed? So an example is they may collect your SPS or your GLX and intervals, certain intervals, 15 minutes, hour, or however the frequency is. Once you disabled your account and you didn't delete your account, is it still being counted? So those are things I think you want to look at, and then it is also like. The SOC2 for processing integrity, if you want to include it, sometimes you have small issues, and a bunch of small issues can aggregate and they can grow and become bigger concerns, and sometimes they can be catastrophic. So it's a good barometer. It's something. It's a good use case for. I think processing integrity is one of those principle that and the controls that go along with it. It makes you think, and there are a lot of use cases, and there's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of things that both the the player community base, and then also the developer may not necessarily think about. And as we play the games, things come up and things like that. So, and especially when you're involving now just not only gameplay and the mechanics, the meta, and but now the money, the economic aspect, the finance, the token. So there's a lot of arbitrage hedging and a lot of currency management or token management to kind of put into consideration. And the game fairness is always a challenge, and I think this is where the integrity of the game comes in. I think the focus for the developers, for the first part of the processing integrity, the first criteria here, there I believe there are about five criteria. The entity obtains the or generates, uses, and communicates relevant quality information regarding the objectives related to processing, including definition of data processed and product and service specifications to support the use of the products and services. Here, I think in the Web3 world, it's an evolving landscape. It's something that changes over time, and it's a learning. We're really early into this process, so I think this is something that I'm also very fascinated about and to look into as we baseline a SOC 2 with a processing integrity, and then as the years go along, we see the elements that may change, even though the actual generic control or the generic criteria may remain the same in terms of like management developing and the metrics and the definitions, the areas. But I think the components and the type of data that they have, the number of tokens alone will increase over time, especially for like Splinterlands. You add the number of tokens that come with the LAN aspect of it. So there will be a lot of changes. The meta, the type of cards, the large number of players, number of database, and the number of transactions, the processing on the blockchain. I think the blockchain itself is a very unique element added to the process of integrity. And in terms of the areas that we look at from the report standpoint and the risk and control matrix, we look at the control description, the test script, test performed, test results, and if it's applicable to previous SOC 2, the control owners. And this is the same for every processing integrity piece of the risk control matrix. It comes fairly standard. Any of the documents, the gaps, management's response, and their remediation plan process. So for all the controls that we look at, and some controls are optional. It's up to management or the user to request that, or if they find that it becomes a priority or more relevant for like configuration. And you'll see a lot of these are for the processing integrity principle. There are definitely some optional control description to consider. The second one is the entity implements policies and procedures. I think a good hygiene for any type of control or any type of environment, you want to look at policies and procedures, and you want to make sure that it is representative of the environment and it's inclusive to be complete, it's accurate, and it meets the objectives. So like for the first for one of the control description here, the application edits limit input to include value ranges, the data preparation, individual batches. I think also some parts of this may look at it more of a old school technology versus so like EDI, for instance, or it uses OCR technologies versus a lot of the blockchain and the AMM, the automated market maker type algorithm may change, and also some of it may use some kind of AI structure. So the technology and the use case will have to be adapted to the control description itself. We'll have to look at it like free text and things some of those natures. System edits require mandatory fields. I think this is important for the database side, and this is referring to the EDI, the electronic piece. And any of the manual forms, sometimes we still live in a manual world, depending on the client and the user organization we're talking about. The inputs are coded with identification numbers, registration. So this is more completeness and being able to trace it from a validity and restriction perspective, and it's accurate. Some of these are optional and things like that. Whether you're doing like a week or a full system daily incremental type of backup DR type, and this is the third processing integrity criteria, the control itself. The entity implements policies and procedures over system processing to result in product services and reporting to meet the entity's objective. These are backup. They're considered optional in some of the environments, and some may be deferred to another third party like AWS or Azure or Google, depending on your source. And the frequency is just depending on how important it is and things like that. Scheduling and the logical access, how data is moved. The fourth criteria, the control, the entity implements policies and procedures to make available or deliver output completely, accurately, and timely in accordance with specifications to meet the entity's objectives. So the application, some of them, some of the updates may require like application regression testing. Some of it may need to have certain values looked at on a monthly basis, the total records processed versus total records received. So some of it may be part of like from an accounting perspective. If you're looking at it, you want to look at the ultimate and like the three-way matching piece of the accounting records and things like that. And then the security piece to make sure that it's properly handled, approved from a handling segregation of duty, and ensuring that only the approved users are accessing and manipulating the data. The fifth piece, the entity implements policies and procedures to store inputs, items in the processing, and outputs completely, accurately, and timely in accordance with the system specifications. So this one is a mirror image of application data files. Is created nightly, things like that. The monitoring piece of it, the usage, the logical access to stored data is restricted at the application and database level, not just at the infrastructure or OS level. Because at the end of the day, at times you can bypass that straight to the application and the database. Physical access to the stored data is properly restricted and authorized. The application is configured to automatically perform edit checks. Data is reconciled on a monthly basis by rolling forward. Prior period balances, I think these are just the control items that I think the user entity should consider. So this is an overview of what some of the things that CPA firms, auditors, or those assisting management from a readiness standpoint would look towards in terms of the for either developing or building the use case for the processing integrity principle for the SOC2 piece. Please let me know if you have any questions. Either message me or post it. I'll be more than happy to work with you on it. And if you have any other suggestions and recommendations, please let me know that as well. Thank you so much for your time.